This is not Nathan. This is a different person.
It's flat. It is stationary. Stationary. Stationary, right?
Through time-lapse photography, the velocity of these clouds has been dramatically increased. While they were actually drifting over the mountains at approximately 27 miles per hour, they now have the appearance of moving at well over 100, 4 times their normal speed. If the clouds were stationary and the Earth was revolving underneath them, this is how it would appear if the Earth was spinning at 100 miles per hour. Yet we're told that the Earth is spinning at 10 times that speed.
Yeah, the atmosphere moves with the Earth because it's connected to the Earth via gravity, and the atmosphere has a viscosity, which causes it to move along with the Earth. Oh God, these people.
Consider this. Those who maintain that the Earth is a globe that spins suggest that people standing at the equator are being whirled around at approximately 1,000 miles an hour.
In linear velocity, but the Earth doesn't move linearly in terms of how fast you're describing. It has rotational velocity, right?
They further maintain that the Earth is spinning around the Sun at a speed of 67,000 miles per hour.
Yes, all motion is relative, but yes.
And that our Sun is supposedly racing around the center of our galaxy at some 600,000 miles per hour.
Let's be clear. Racing is a relative term. Let's see how fast. How long does it take for the solar system to orbit the galaxy? It takes 230 million years for the solar system to do one complete rotation around the center of the Milky Way galaxy. So we're whipping through space at a whopping one rotation every 230 million years. It's really not that fast. And motion is always relative, right? You're using, again, sort of a linear velocity relative to the center as opposed to rotational, which is really what you should be using. And regardless, we're all moving with it, right? It's all moving together. That's what a galaxy is. At least a spiral galaxy like the one in which we live. There's tons of solar systems and stuff in it, but it's all sort of moving together. So from our perspective, it appears to be standing still because we live and die in such a short span relative to, you know, space-time scales.
And yet, you and I both know that on many days it's possible to stand outside without a single hair being messed up by the breeze.
Yes, again, the atmosphere moves with the Earth. It's all part of it.
When I first started looking into the idea of a rotating Earth and really thinking about that and applying it to the everyday world I see, one of the first things I thought about were planes flying above. Actually, I couldn't find any type of relativity problem that used planes and a moving Earth.
Again, because airs fly through the medium of our atmosphere, and the atmosphere moves with the Earth. What's complicated about that? I mean, the actual systems at play are complicated, but you can understand them. Even if I don't understand the complex math that goes into calculating the fluid dynamics of the atmosphere and how it moves around relative to the gravity that causes it to spin with the Earth, I understand that it is the case.
Now, there's tons of relativity problems out there showing trains and cars and other things that are moving on a surface.
This does not count as fake sky. They're not saying the sky is fake. They're just saying they don't understand how the motion of the atmosphere relative to the Earth works.
That is assumed to not be moving, but there's nothing that accounts for an Earth moving with the planes as it spins around it.
Again, because planes fly through the... It would be like asking oh, fish in the ocean or submarines in the ocean, why don't they have to worry about the spin of the Earth? Because they're in water, which moves with the Earth, the same as the atmosphere moves with the Earth. We're all part of this system that's all moving together.
This axis on the equator, you divide the circumference by the time it takes to make one revolution, which is 24 hours. And when you do that, you get roughly 1,000.
Belsthar says nobody understands fluid dynamics. Hey, I'm not going to pretend I understand the intricacies of fluid dynamics either, but I recognize fluid dynamics exist, and then the atmosphere can have a pull caused on it by the Earth's gravity to make it move with it, right? Like, you just need to understand the basics of the concept in order to know that it's the case.
38 miles per hour. Okay.
I'm on the 19th chapter. All of this has been filled with just...
Oh, there's Nathan! This is like a video where it looks like they're looking at a bunch of people's little clips about this.
Excellent information, stuff everyone should know. I mean, this is literally the Bible for Flat Earth. You should get this if you're a Flat Earth...
Nathan, I thought the Bible was the Bible for Flat Earth. Not being a very good Christian.
Believer, or you're someone who's questioning the Flat Earth, this is a book you have to have. So I'm going to read straight from chapter 19, and there's...
Let's take a look, just so we can have a little more clarity. Why does the atmosphere move with the Earth? I understand the answer is gravity and fluid dynamics, but I need to understand a little bit more specifics. Bound to the Earth by gravity, most of the atmosphere spins along with it as a result of friction with the ground as the viscosity or stickiness of the different layers of air above it. Above 200 kilometers, however, the incredibly thin atmosphere actually spins faster than the Earth. The cause of this bizarre superrotation effect remains unclear, but also has been detected on Venus. It's interesting. So basically, yeah, just gravity. Do-do, 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 do-do. The atmosphere rotates along with the Earth for the same reason you do. Force isn't just needed to make something go. That's a basic law of physics. That's a thing that's moving, that a thing that's moving will just keep moving if there's no force on it. Force is needed either to make something change its speed or to make its motion point in a new direction. A force can do both or just one of these. Most forces do both, but a force that pushes in the exact same direction you've already been going only changes your speed and does not change your direction. A force that pushes at a right angle to the direction that you're already going changes your direction and does not add any speed. A force at 10 o'clock, for example, will change both your speed and your direction. As you stand still on Earth, you continue going the same speed, but as your direction changes. Between day and night, you move opposite directions, so forces on you must be at a right angle to your direction of motion. Indeed, you are. Your motion is from west to east along the surface of the Earth, and the force of gravity pulls you down towards the center of the Earth. The force and your motion are at right angles. Similarly, for the atmosphere, it's moving along with the Earth and moving at a constant speed. It does not need anything to push it along with the Earth, since only its direction of motion is changing. It only needs a force at a right angle to its motion, the same as you and the force that does its job again. Gravity. There you go.
There's a segment talks about centrifugal force, and I've never heard this brought up in the group, so I just want you guys to hear this, okay? This is beautiful. So, says the problem with the gravitational theory is that according to that theory, the gravitational attraction to the Earth by all persons and objects remain the same at all places on the Earth. So what he's saying is gravity is the same everywhere on Earth, according to the theory.
Yeah, there's a little bit of difference in terms of if there was like extreme elevation, but it's not really relevant in terms of your day-to-day life.
Okay, so assuming that's correct, that means that the gravitational force at the North Pole is the same as the gravitational force at the equator. That poses a very real problem if the Earth is spinning as alleged. Here's why. That is because the centrifugal force decreases every mile towards the North Pole. So think of it like this. You're on a giant merry-go-round, right? But the merry-go-round is a ball. If you're at the equator and the merry-go-round spinning around, there's more centrifugal force than if you're at the North Pole.
There's very little centrifugal force on the Earth, though, because we're not moving that fast. The Earth spins rotationally 1 time per day. It's not very fast. It's enough that it creates a little bit of a bulge at the equator, but that's something that's happened over a long period of time, right? As a person, the centrifugal force caused by the spin of the Earth is fucking negligible. It's not something you have to think about. It exists, but it's not something that should factor into any of your thoughts in terms of why aren't we flying off the Earth?
So that's because the centrifugal force decreases every mile towards the North Pole, where the centrifugal force is ultimately reduced to 0 at the North Pole because the North Pole is the axis of the alleged spinning Earth. Consequently, the speed of the Earth's spin at those more northern and southern latitudes from the equator would be slower than the speed at the equator.
And so
Its linear velocity would be less, but its rotational velocity will be the same, I would think. Because they're still spinning around 360 degrees in a day, regardless of whether or not, like, let's say you're literally at the North Pole. And not magnetic north, but like north-north, where the actual, like, axis of the, or where the actual poles are, more or less. You'd still be spinning around 360 in one day, even if you didn't really move your position, right?
we assume right here that this is the Earth rotating at 1,038 miles per hour. And so what I want to do is look at this atmosphere and look at 3 points and 3 elevations. At this moment, we expect all of these points of air to make one complete revolution and come back to the same spot in 24 hours, right? Because the atmosphere moves with the Earth.
I don't know if it's exactly 1-to-1 because, again, the spin of the atmosphere relative to the Earth is caused by both gravity and friction. So there might be a little bit of a difference. Again, I'm not sure. But, like, yeah, more or less it spins along with the Earth, yeah.
The atmosphere never gets left behind. So right off the bat, since we know the velocity is equal to distance divided by time, we can say that VA, the velocity of point A, is greater than the velocity of point B, which is greater than the velocity of point C. Because point A has a longer distance to travel in 24 hours than point B.
You're applying linear velocity to a rotational system. It's changing rotationally. All of those things are spinning, assuming that they move at the same exact rate. 360 degrees. Why are you applying linear velocity to this?
Point B has a longer distance to C. Hot air rises, as we know, and cool air sinks, right? So how does the air speed up? When it's heated, it rises, but then it has to start moving faster.
It's all part of the same system, right? This is like if I don't have my pocket watch on me from the professor, my D&D character, but like a pocket watch, right? The hands of a clock are connected to one another. It all moves as one piece. So even though linearly, yes, the end of the clock hand is moving more, again, linearly, it's still rotationally moving 360 degrees. It's all part of the same system, right? The same amount of force is moving the pivot end and the far end of the clock hand. It doesn't matter if one requires this to move linearly over more space. It's still part of the same system. It's just that in a clock, this is a rigid body, whereas the atmosphere is a fluid and therefore is going to be more complex in how you would have to calculate that stuff. Again, not something I can do, but I understand these things exist.
Now, even if it's only a little bit faster, the difference in these velocities, if you calculate them, isn't much, but they do have to be greater or they will start to get left behind.
Why? Why would fireworks and rain be impossible? Again, they always do this. Stop applying linear velocity. It's rotating. It's rotating! Talking about the Red Bull space jump thing. Was he out of the atmosphere for that? I don't think he was. He was probably right on the edge of it. He fell through the atmosphere, though. He was still within the atmosphere once he got into it. Are you kidding me? He wasn't even 100,000 feet up. It just said he was 39,000 feet up. How high up does the atmosphere go? The atmosphere extends, let's see, 8 to 14.5 kilometers high, 5 to 9 miles. Red Bull space jump. Red Bull space jump. 24 miles up. Interesting. That's some scary shit. I don't know how this dude did this.
But he's lost control.
Stratosphere. So it is still part of Earth's atmosphere, the stratosphere. So he was in the stratosphere, which is a high up place in the Earth's... Let's see. There's the troposphere, then there's the stratosphere. So he was in the stratosphere, but the actual atmosphere continues into the mesosphere and the thermosphere. So he was still in the atmosphere, even if it's obviously much thinner where he was. You wouldn't feel movement on the Earth because we're all moving with it all the time. You don't feel motion, you feel change in velocity. And the Earth isn't changing its velocity. At least not quick enough for us to notice, right? What? No, it wouldn't. Why do you think that would be the case? They're all moving in the medium and moving with the medium. So relative to the plane, it's like the atmosphere isn't moving because it's moving with it. Do you people not understand how this works? If you're standing in something that is moving and you are moving with it, how do I explain this? Like when you're in a car or a train or an airplane, if it's relatively stable and there isn't a ton of change in velocity, you don't feel it. when you're on an airplane, as long as there's no turbulence, even though you're going hundreds and hundreds of miles per hour, it doesn't necessarily feel like it, right? You feel like you're sitting stationary. Because more or less you are, even though obviously you're not relative to the ground below you, you're still sitting in a chair and moving along with it at hundreds and hundreds of miles per hour. It's why you got on the airplane, because the plane moves fast and you move fast along with it. No, it won't. They're just, it bugs me so much because they're just using the exact same argument over and over, so it's making me sound like a broken record, but I have to address this. No, they are moving in the atmosphere at the same speed as the atmosphere. Therefore, relative to it, it is not moving. It would be like let's say I'm in a plane, and excuse me, I'm in a plane, and in front of me in the tray, under the tray table in the pocket, there's like a magazine I want to read. Imagine a flat earther coming up to you and be like, "How are you gonna grab that magazine? It's moving at 600 miles per hour." Like, yeah, so am I. We're both in the plane, and then you grab it, because relative to it, you're moving at the same speed. Motion is relative. This is what relativity and motion is. I'm gonna try and skip ahead to see if they get to a better argument. You're not taking the jet stream into account. Jet streams exist. Jet streams. Jet streams. Do-do-do-do-do-do. Do-do-do-do-do-do. There are jet streams on the Earth where, because of, again, various fluid dynamics and temperature differences, there are these jet streams where the atmosphere will blow stronger in certain directions. So if you take a flight that's in the same direction as the jet stream, the flight will be quicker. And if your flight is flying against the jet stream, it'll be slower. But that has nothing to do with the spin of the Earth. That has to do with just, again, the fluid dynamics of the atmosphere, of which I don't particularly understand, nor do I need to understand that they exist. It's loud. Why? Why would it... Why? No, they're moving with the atmosphere, so it's the same distance, dummy. Sorry, I hate to call them dumb. I really do. I think it's a better way to get them to come out of these silly beliefs. Not, like, speaking down to them, but, like, holy crap, it's tough. It's tough. If a plane leaves LA at noon, it will arrive in Tokyo about 10 hours later. It will be daylight the entire flight. Okay. because the atmosphere is moving with the Earth. How many times can I say this? Jesus. Do you have any other arguments other than not understanding how the atmosphere works?
If a telescope is pointing at a star, and both are stationary, then obviously the light comes straight into the telescope. In 1729, Bradley found that he had to tip his telescope forward very slightly to get a star in the center of his telescope. It was assumed that this was due to the motion of the Earth around the Sun. Let us assume that the telescope was moving at 5 miles an hour and had to be tipped 5 degrees. This 5-degree tipping, however, could equally be caused by the ether moving at 5 miles an hour, carrying
the ether's been disproved multiple times. These people think that the ether is like something that the stars and moon and everything are suspended in. Like it's like almost like a tapestry above the Earth and the stars are in it and it's moving over you, almost like a planetarium. Not the case.
Stars around the Earth. As we see here, the light would be coming in at the same angle and the telescope would still have to be tipped 5 degrees.
Okay, and if my grandmother had wheels, she'd be a bicycle, but that's not the case. You can't just say, well, this would also explain the fact that you need to change your telescope's, like, place it's pointing at because of the rotation of the Earth. Actually, it could also be this. Like, okay, but you need to evidence that. There's not evidence that the aether exists. In fact, quite the opposite. There's tons of evidence that it doesn't. So
tipping the telescope does not tell us whether it is the starlight moving or the telescope moving.
So here you understand relative motion when it can be used to try and bullshit your way into a way of explaining why it looks like the stars are moving because the Earth is rotating. No, actually the stars are moving. Why is it always so... It's always so Earth-centric with these people. It's like they genuinely can't fathom a universe where they aren't the center of attention. Like, sorry. I'm sorry if it scares you that we're not. But it's just not the case.
However, there is a simple experiment that can determine whether it was the Earth that was moving or the ether and starlight. All that you had to do was record the tipping required for any particular star, then fill the telescope with water, which greatly slows down the speed of light in the telescope. So here is the moving telescope filled with water, tipped at 5 degrees, and you can see that the starlight does not now reach the eyepiece at the bottom. This is because the starlight moves much more slowly when passing through water. However, if the telescope is tipped further, say 10 degrees, then the starlight will then be visible again in the...
Let's take a look at what this experiment's from. Water in telescope aether experiment. Aether drag hypothesis in the 19th century. Fuck, they're 18th, 19th century study. Here we go. There we go. Aether drag hypothesis in the 19th century, the theory of luminiferous aether was the hypothetical medium for the propagation of light, was widely discussed. An important part of this discussion was the question concerning the state of the motion of the Earth with respect to this medium. The aether drag hypothesis dealt with the question of whether or not luminiferous aether is dragged by or entrained within moving matter. According to the first variant, no relative motion exists between the Earth and aether. According to the second one, relative motion exists, and thus the speed of light should depend on the speed of this motion, aether wind, which should be measured by instruments at rest on Earth's surface. Specific aether models were invented by Augustin Jean Fresnel, who in 1818 proposed the aether is partially entrained by matter. The other one was proposed by George Stokes in 1845, in which the aether is completely entrained within the vicinity of matter. While Frenzel's almost stationary theory was apparently confirmed by the Fizeau experiment in 1851, Stokes's theory was apparently confirmed by the Michelson-Morley experiment in 1881 and 1887. This contradictory situation was resolved by the works of Hendrik Antoon Lorentz, 1895-1904, whose Lorentz aether theory banished any form of aether dragging, and finally with the work of Albert Einstein, whose theory of special relativity does not contain the aether as a mechanical medium at all. So there you go. This was all disproven. Let me see which one has the... No, that's not a I'm trying to see if they actually did this specific experiment with the telescope in the water. Michelson-Morley experiment. There it is. Complete aether dragging is inconsistent with the phenomenon of stellar aberration. In this illustration, imagine the stars to be infinitely distant. Aberration occurs when the observer's velocity has a component that is perpendicular in the lines traveled by the light incoming from the star, as seen in the animation on the left. The telescope must be tilted before the star will appear in the center of the eyepiece, as seen in the animation of the right. If the aether is dragged in the vicinity of the Earth, then the telescope must be pointed directly at the star to appear in the center of the eyepiece. That's still not the same thing, though. Anyway, they're basically citing bullshit studies from the 18th century. Thank you to Kezia 8000 for following. I appreciate that.
The eyepiece. It has to be tipped further because the light is now slower when in the telescope. But if the starlight is going past the telescope at 5 miles an hour, then when it is filled with water, no further tipping is needed because the light is coming in at 5 degrees anyway. The starlight stays on the same path but is only travelling slower in the water. To recap, if it is the telescope that is moving, then when it is filled with water, it has to be tipped further to see the star.
Yeah, is it not refraction? I feel like some of this could be explained by the fact that the water's refracting the light, right?
If the telescope is stationary...
This is not string cheese. This is a Nutella Be Ready bar. It's like a crumbly wafer with a little bit of Nutella in it.
Drifting past us, then it does not have to be tipped further. In 1871, George Biddle Airy, the Astronomer Royal, performed this experiment.
Hopefully that makes sense for everyone. Follow along.
We already had mentions cheese marked off from earlier.
Let me try and wrap your head around this. So this is one of the ways I thought the globe doesn't make sense. Is because if the globe is spinning, and they say it's even pear-shaped because of the spin, then the water should pool around the middle. We should have no land around the equator. There should just be water around the equator, and then the land would be more near the poles or more near the southern and northern hemispheres. But because there's no spin and there's no centrifugal force and there's land around the equator, I really started to dive into this flat earth thing, and then it dawned on me that moonlight's cold. I started testing it, and then when all the science was basically leaving the globe and coming to flat earth in my mind, and I realized that the Bible said,
I don't know who invented Nutella, but bless them.
The earth is the center of the universe, and I had missed that the whole time because I didn't start out a believer. I was atheist. I spent 5 years researching the Bible.
We'll do Nathan next.
Trying to understand how it was wrong, and it turns out I couldn't find anything wrong about it. There's parts that you might disagree with, but you can't debunk the Bible as historically accurate.
I can and I have. Check out Hannah and Jake on YouTube for that series. The Bible is not terribly historically accurate, especially in the Old Testament.
And the message in there, it stands.
It is, though. It is spinning, it is rotating, revolving, tilting, wobbling, all that.
What is wrong with you people? Earth is flat.
Dude Spanking Dude says, next week can we do a whole religious-centered Tinfoil Tuesday with minimal flat earth stuff? Yeah.
It is stationary. Stationary. Stationary.
I like that they thought, how am I gonna really sell this video at the end? Crazy street preacher. That'll do it. They'll believe me then.